The unsurpassed, penetrating truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad books. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. At that time, Shakyamuni Buddha raised his golden arms, touching Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva's head, and saying, Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva, as regards your supernatural power, your infinite loving kindness, your wisdom, and your eloquence, the Buddhas of the 10 directions for millions of kalpas wish to praise you and your incomparable activities, yet they can never give the fullest account. Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva, remember that I am standing in the presence of such a multitude. They have assembled at these 33 heavens to declare unto you that you must not allow any sentient beings to fall into the evil state of suffering for even one day and one night. So much the more you should never allow them to be cast into the 5 Avicii hells, or the last and deepest of the 8 hot hells, where the culprits suffer, die, or instantly return to suffering without interruption for millions of kalpas. At that time, Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva knelt down with clasped hands and spoke thus to Shakyamuni Buddha. Honored of the world, please do not be worried. If any sentient beings of the future have only one thought of respect for the Buddha's teachings, or later in the scripture he says, one thought of meritorious deed, I shall endeavor my utmost to relieve such people out of the sufferings of birth and death, and lead them to salvation by numerous ways and means. Such begins the litany of Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva and his vows, or her vows, taken from chapter 13 of the Sutra on the original vows and attainment of merits of Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva, who is known as the king of vows, one of great courage, and master of the 6 worlds of desire, and in particular is a protector of vulnerable beings. His Sanskrit name, Kshtigarbha, literally means earth store or womb of the earth. And in Japanese, as we know, he's called Jizo Bosatsu. In Chinese, Ti-tsang, Busa, and Korean, Chi-tsang. And he is certainly one of the most popular bodhisattva mahasattvas, along with Kanzeon in Japan and in China. The Buddha, being close to the end of his life, is offering this sutra to the beings of the Trayastrimsa heaven as a mark of gratitude and remembrance of his beloved mother. His mother went to this heaven just a week or so after the Buddha was born. In the sutra, Kshtigarbha further promises the Buddha that he will work hard at rescuing beings until the time the next Buddha, Maitreya, comes. He says, even if their good deeds are as little as a hair, a drop of water, a grain of sand, a mote of dust, or a bit of down, I shall gradually help living beings to liberation. And if hells are not empty of beings, I will never realize Buddhahood. The Buddha is relieved and says, I bless you, Kshtigarbha, with success in carrying out your strong vows, so that I shall have no worry about human beings in the future. In her book on Jizo Bodhisattva, Reverend Chosen Beis Roshi quotes Venerable Heng Shure, whose master brought perhaps one of the first English translations of the Kshtigarbha Sutra to this country. And he says, anyone who thinks that Buddhism is an escapist religion hasn't met Jizo Bodhisattva. The sutra gives various accounts of the prior births of the Bodhisattva, one of them being that of a young girl in China, mourning the death of her mother and very concerned about where her mother would have ended up after this life, as the mother had killed animals and had been slanderous of the three treasures. After meditating for a long time, the girl heard a voice commanding her to recite the name of the Buddha. And it said as she practiced this and deepened her meditation, she went into a state of ecstasy, and she arrived at the gates of hell, where she discovered that she had saved her mother from the torments of the Avicii hell, and found that her mother had been reborn in one of the heavens. Sacred girl, as she has been called since then, having seen the deep sufferings of the hells while helping her mother, was so deeply moved by them that she made a great vow to rescue all beings from the hells in the future, thus being reborn as the Bodhisattva Kshtigarbha. The sutra further describes how beings in a great number of hells were rescued by various other transformations of Kshtigarbha as well, and how these beings, when they look up in faith, even for a second, when they turn towards the Buddha in their hearts, Kshtigarbha is able to comfort them and help them out of those hells. So the Bodhisattvas, as is the case with all the Bodhisattvas, are, for lack of a better word, perhaps a compilation of many, many beings, something much bigger than one being. So she or he is the patron bodhisattva, in particular, of those who are in deep pain or vulnerable states, the poor, oppressed, sick, hungry, dying, and the newly born, as well as those troubled by spirits and nightmares. In Japan, as most of you may know, the bodhisattva was particularly called upon to protect infants and children who've died, and aborted fetuses, as abortion was the main form of birth control in that country for centuries. Most cemeteries in Japan have Jizo statues, many of them sometimes in the form of a child Jizo, sometimes the monk Jizo, honoring aborted fetuses and children who've died. Reverend Master Jiyu writes in her teaching on Buddhist iconography that Kshtigarbha strongly advocates filial piety, not only so as to instruct people to remember their ancestors, but also to teach the young proper respect for their parents and elders, as well as true respect for all life. And this is one of his strong features, is this respect for all life, the biggest and the tiniest, including all insects. I found myself, recently looking to Jizo Bodhisattva when I heard of my father's distress at his increased deterioration of memory, and resulting in his having to move out of his apartment into a temporary living situation whilst waiting for a place in a nursing home. And I found quite a bit of distress arising. And I found myself offering merit and remembering that Jizo will make use of any bit of good deed or thought that a person has had in their life. And interestingly, it brought immediate comfort. And in my contact with my father since then, I can see and feel Jizo's work and help in motion. Even though he's in a difficult situation, something has shifted. I find myself better able to join with the Bodhisattva's work. Ultimately, filial piety has to be extended to the wish to take care of all beings, human or animal. It's said in our scriptures that all beings have been our parents, and we have been theirs in the past at some time or other. That presents quite a change in perspective, doesn't it, when we contemplate that. The mountain associated with Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva is Chuhuashan in South China, forgive my pronunciation again, where he is said to have lived during the Tang period, 10th century or so, as a Korean prince who had entered the priesthood there and trained diligently and vigorously as a monk. Upon his death, after his entry into parinirvana, apparently his body did not decay, so people recognized him as the manifested, transformed body of Kshtigarbha Bodhisattva, and the mountain where he trained is regarded as Kshtigarbha's Bodhi Mandala. This may be one of the reasons why the Bodhisattva always appears as a monk, rather different from most of the other great Bodhisattvas who usually appear wearing the adornments of an upper-class householder. The robes of a monk are also always a sign in Buddhism of practice and that which is good or trustworthy. And Jizo wearing them also has the meaning of encouragement to train in the Buddha's precepts, this being the road out of the hells of our suffering, which are the result of habitually acting on greed, anger, and delusion. In his instruction to suffering beings, Jizo particularly emphasizes respect for the three jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and a belief in and correct understanding of the law of cause and effect. Ignorance of, confusion about, and neglect of this universal law of karma causes beings to fall into and get stuck in the three evil paths of existence. He stands or sits in his lotus blossom, sometimes in ease posture, ready to step into the world or the underworld, wherever and whenever needed. He usually holds the Nyoi jewel, in Sanskrit called the Sintamani or wish-fulfilling jewel, in his left hand, which is really the luminous jewel of the Dharma, of faith in the precepts, able to fulfill our true heart's wish. Its brightness lights up the dark and convoluted paths of ignorance in the hell states and draws beings to Jizo, who encourages them to turn towards the Buddha in their hearts, their Buddha nature, which we, when we're in those states, have completely lost sight of, at least at that time. In his right hand, Jizo holds a priest's traveling staff called shakujo in Japanese, which is topped with a metal finial in which are metal rings that jingle when the monk is walking. The jingling not only alerts insects and small beings as the trainee travels on his pilgrimage of Buddhist training, protecting vulnerable beings from accidentally being harmed, but in the case of monks of old, the jingling of the rings on the staff also allowed the monk to remain silent when approaching a village and asking for alms, as well as to help the monk to be able to continue to keep up his or her meditation whilst on the road. Our monks' shakujos usually have 6 rings, representing the practice of the 6 paramitas on the Bodhisattva path. The 6 rings also represent the 6 worlds or states of mind that beings are reborn into, either in our current lives or in the future. So with every step, Jizo proclaims the truth of the Dharma and is willing to appear in any of the 6 worlds, in any state of being, in order to help beings turn their hearts towards the Buddha. In particular, Jizo Bodhisattva uses his staff to break open the gates to the hells and hungry ghost states. These states of suffering have a quality of deep isolation and unawareness of anything but the suffering. And his great bows and tender skillfulness helps us, when we're in those states, break through them if we but look up for even an instant. Of the four elements, Jizo Bosatsu is associated with the earth in particular. He was said to have borne witness to the Buddha's perfection of the paramitas when the army of Mara was attacking the Buddha during the night of his enlightenment. Thus we can call on him to bear witness to the merit of our training thus far when things get rough. It's good to know that there is someone who listens, someone who sees the merit, who remembers it. He helps pull beings into sanity, out of the darkness of the underworlds of our addictions and self-destruction. His Nyoy jewel helps him to never lose sight of the Buddha, and it is his faith, his complete confidence in the eternal Tathagata, that allows him to enter any of the 6 worlds of desire, including the worst of the hells, the deepest suffering, without fear. His example encourages us, bodhisattvas in training with a small b, to meet our most difficult states of mind, the deepest of despair, with stillness in faith, and the courage and willingness to keep going no matter where we find ourselves. I was reminded in reflecting on this bodhisattva of the famous poem that Keizan quotes in the Denkoroku again. Apparently it's originally from the Lotus Sutra, the scripture on the immeasurable life of the Tathagata. And this is Reverend Master Jiu's paraphrased translation. Constantly I am at the Ryo Zen meeting. That's on Vulture Peak where the Buddha is teaching throughout endless ages. Even should there be a great fire, my heart is always safe and calm and filled with heavenly beings and humans. Thus Jizo appears in all the worlds. He knows with certainty that all beings are at heart Buddha, and thus can make good use of even the tiniest bit of merit or good deed or kind thought that a being has had in the past, eventually bringing this jewel of their true nature into the light of day. He knows that all beings have intuitive knowledge of Buddha nature, this also being one of the laws of the universe. I was remembering some years ago when I was paying off some debts and working as a language tutor, mostly English and ESL and German. I held this teaching particularly in mind as I went to students' homes to assist them with their studies. We are perhaps all familiar with some of the hell states that can arise when we're small beings in a big and confusing world and expected to do this rapid learning that our educational system requires. We always remember the hell states, I think of our adolescents in particular. Those of us, most of us, have had them. I always found that by encouraging the students to find and make use of the resources they already had, both from their textbooks as well as their inner resources of courage and faith in themselves, they were able to make good progress. Often this happened by just sitting still with them. Reverend Master Jiu used to teach the young children in the Dharma school here years ago to trust their secret place within. And she used all kinds of skillful means to point them towards it. One that I particularly remember is her using the Fisher-Price castle and the human figures that came with it in play with the kids. There was always a room in the castle that she pointed out they could remain in and sit still and be quiet, and they could be safe within their secret place. And with her usual great sense of humor and practicality, she allowed them to throw the parent figures down the tower into the dungeon whenever they felt the need. Our statues of Jizo have stones placed at his feet, as you may notice. We have 2 of them. And it said, with these stones, he lines the paths of hell to help children and vulnerable beings stuck there, including animals, for example, who may be being abused. He helps them to find their way out. Another aspect of Jizo's appearance, in my understanding, is that he's always a disciple. Even though he's a highly accomplished bodhisattva, he vows to assist the Buddha, and in his open, kind appearance, indicative of one who is always following the Buddha in all things, always willing to learn with an open mind and to discover a new truth. I believe it's because of this quality that she is able to recognize merit and kindness in others, even when it's maybe cloaked in cruelty or dullness or coarseness. Can you think of any person who hasn't had at least one kind thought or moved in the direction of kindness at some time? I can't. I would guess that even the meanest of tyrants in human history showed kindness to their children, or a spouse, or to someone or something, their garden or their pets, or if only themselves, at least once. If we really contemplate this teaching seriously, it brings comfort and is a great healer of depression and worry. When beings that we know or we're close to in particular are struggling, flailing, suffering, and we feel helpless in doing something for them, this is a good bodhisattva to call upon. It'll help us to see, help them to bring out the goodness in their hearts. Jesus shows us how to practice in all the 6 worlds. Those created of our own thoughts and experience, being willing to enter into our own hellish, hungry ghost or animal-like states in order to convert the karma that brings them about. And he shows us how to live in this world with others, being of the greatest benefit possible. Whatever our work or profession, we all have contact with others and are able to hold out our faith when needed. As we deepen our training, we see more and more kindness in people. At least that's my experience. And by appreciating and responding to it, recognizing it, a natural, meritorious stream of karma is encouraged and initiated. And it's a very wonderful, freeing thing. Relieves tremendous worry. When we listen to or watch the news, we hear about situations involving deep suffering and have the opportunity to bring forth sympathy and offer merit. Just by doing this, we enter into the Bodhisattva's vows. And the more we turn in that direction, the deeper the vow becomes until it is unbreakable. It is said that the Bodhisattva vows continue on after death. Perhaps in a very different form. We don't really need to know. And as I see it, the Bodhisattvas get bigger as each of us do this in our own lives. Nothing brings greater peace and joy and comfort, in my experience, than allowing our true heart's wish for the well-being and freedom from suffering of all beings to shine forth. I was thinking of something that brought to mind Jizo Bodhisattva a little while ago. You all may know the story of Angulimala, who was one of the Buddha's disciples, and he had been a mass murderer, and that's an interesting story itself, and how he came to that through what started out as quite a sincere intention to be a good student, follow his teacher. In any case, created serious harm, killed 999 people, and of course a very famous story. And when he saw the Buddha, he had a complete conversion. And after his full Sangha and conversion, he wanted to become a monk. And it's said that later in his life, of course he had to bear the pain of people being frightened of him and even stoning him when he went on alms rounds and so on. But he made a vow later in his life, apparently, to help any newborn beings come into this world safely and be able to hear the Dharma. And so he was invited to be present at childbirth, which is an interesting, huge act of trust. And because of this vow, was able to help numerous little ones come into the world safely. And when I was thinking of that, it seemed to me like perhaps an early form of Bodhisattva Jiso's vows. And who knows, he might have been helping some of those beings whom he had killed come into a more favorable rebirth. I don't know. I'd like to end with one of my favorite quotes from the Avatamsaka scripture on faith, as I feel that this bodhisattva has to do, in my life in any case, so much with courage and faith, and the willingness that faith grows out of. Faith is the basis of the path, the mother of virtues, nourishing and growing all good ways, cutting away the net of doubt, freeing from the torrent of passion, revealing the unsurpassed road of ultimate peace. When faith is undefiled, the mind is pure, obliterating pride. It is the root of reverence, and the foremost wealth in the treasury of religion, being a pure hand to receive the practices. Faith is generous, the mind not begrudging. Faith can joyfully enter the Buddha's teaching. Faith can increase knowledge and virtue. Faith can assure arrival at enlightenment. Faith makes the faculties pure, clear, and sharp. The power of faith is strong and indestructible. Faith can annihilate the root of affliction. Faith can turn one wholly to the virtues of Buddhahood. Faith has no attachment to objects. Transcending difficulties, it reaches freedom from trouble. Faith can go beyond the pathways of demons and reveal the unsurpassed road of liberation. Faith is the unspoiled seed of virtue. Faith can grow the seed of enlightenment. Faith can increase supreme knowledge and can reveal all Buddhas. Therefore, this bodhisattva who is proclaiming this says, I'll explain in steps, practicing in accord, that faith is most powerful, very difficult to have. It's like in all worlds having the wondrous, wish-fulfilling pearl. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.